Dear Governor Kevin Stitt, admittedly, I have done some stupid things in my life, and I am ashamed, embarrassed, and repentant of my youthful actions. But as God is my witness, I was not involved in any way in the crimes that led to Paul Howell being shot and killed on July 28, 1999. I've spent the past 20 years on death row for a crime I did not commit, did not witness, and was not at. I feel terrible for Mr. Howell and his family, but I was not responsible. I did not have a chance to tell my story to the jury at my trial because my lawyers rested the case without calling any witnesses, including my mother, father, sister, and brother, who would have told the jury I was home with them when the crime was committed. Today, I deeply regret my youthful involvement with the people responsible for Mr. Howell's death, and I wish I had just gone and spoken to the police when I heard they were looking for me. If I did that, I don't think I'd be where I am now. While I wished I had gone to the police with what I knew, I was scared to get involved. I was like other young black men in my neighborhood, afraid of the police, and I didn't trust them. I regret not coming forward with what I learned after Mr. Howell's murder, and that my silence meant that those actually responsible for his death are now walking free.
Between 11 and 11:30 p.m. that evening, Chris finally picked me up and we drove to my apartment in Norman. Chris and I had words because he was so late. Chris told me he got into it with some guys and shot at them. I was shocked, but didn't ask any questions. My thought at the time was, the less I knew, the better. After picking up some clean clothes back at my apartment, Chris and I left Norman at around 2 a.m. and headed back to Oklahoma City.
Liddell kept asking me if I knew where Chris was. When I got to Liddell's apartment, he asked me to follow him in a Suburban that was parked there. That made me suspicious, and I refused because I was pretty sure the Suburban was stolen based on stories I had heard about Liddell and how he would steal cars and change serial numbers. Liddell instead drove the Suburban and I followed him in his car. Liddell parked the Suburban at a grocery store and went inside. After a minute, I went into the store. I don't remember if Liddell bought anything. We left the store and drove together in his Firebird to an auto shop. I later learned, after I was arrested, that the auto shop was a chop shop run by a man named Kermit Lottie. Liddell went into the garage while I waited in the car.
Liddell returned 10 or 15 minutes later and looked spooked. We drove in silence back to the grocery store where the Suburban was parked, and Liddell just sat parked behind it for several moments as if thinking. Liddell said the garage didn't want the Suburban because there was a body on the truck or something like that. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I had a bad feeling. I should have bolted and gone to the police, but I didn't. It was then that I learned that someone had been killed the night before in a robbery of a Suburban. I think that at that point, things were starting to add up to me that Liddell and Chris were involved. I should have gone to the police, but I didn't. That was stupid. I regret it. But I was becoming concerned for my and my family's safety. After midnight on Friday, Chris called and asked me to pick him up at a laundromat because he had locked out his grandmother's house. He was insistent. Because he had left his car at my parents' house, I took his car to pick him up and we drove back to my parents' house. I went to the living room couch to watch TV and called some girls on the family phone and fell asleep. Chris said he needed to make calls and went upstairs to use the other phone line in my bedroom upstairs. Looking back, I'm sure that's when Chris hid the gun and bandana that the police later found in my room. By the time I woke up later Friday morning, Chris was gone. After cutting the grass, I was on the phone with a friend and received a call on the other line from Liddell. I later learned he was in police custody and calling me from outside my house. The call was short. Liddell asked what I was doing, and I told him I was talking to a girl. A second call came in, and the person on the other end of the phone asked if I was home. I knew something wasn't right, and I figured it had to do with Chris. I knew he was up to no good, but didn't want to be in the middle of it.
My lawyers didn't offer evidence demonstrating that I could not have been the shooter. At the trial, the only witness identified the shooter as having half an inch of hair sticking out from underneath a stocking cap. That couldn't have been me. A photo of me taken just days before the crime, on July 19, 1999, which was never shown to the jury, shows that I had short, closely cropped hair, not long enough to match the eyewitness's description of the shooter. Chris Jordan, on the other hand, who blamed me for the shooting and worked out a deal with prosecutors to testify against me, fit the description. A photo of Chris at the time shows that he had long hair, which would have stuck out from beneath a stocking cap. The jury was never shown that I couldn't have been the person identified by the eyewitnesses to the crime.
The state hid its deal with Chris Jordan. Chris pled guilty to first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony in connection with Mr. Howell's murder in exchange for testifying against me on behalf of the prosecution. At my trial, Chris lied and testified that I murdered Mr. Howell. Chris Jordan admitted that he set me up. Prior to my trial, Chris admitted to 2 people that I wasn't involved in the murder. In late August or early September 1999, Chris told a man named Manuel Littlejohn that Julius didn't do it, and Julius wasn't there. Chris admitted to Manuel that he tried to frame me by wrapping the gun used to commit the crime in a bandana and hiding it in my house. Chris also told Manuel about his secret side deal with prosecutors, telling him I'm going to do 15 years and go home.
Why didn't the police conduct DNA testing years ago? Why didn't they search Chris and Liddell's homes in the aftermath of the crime? And what might they have found had they done so? Why didn't the police thoroughly investigate obvious suspects in this case, Chris, Liddell, Kermit, and maybe others, instead of secretly giving them sweet deals to point the finger at me? Tunnel vision set in. Why was a racist juror who prejudged my guilt allowed to convict and sentence me to die? I am facing execution even though I didn't kill Mr. Howell, and the answers to these questions are still unanswered. For all these reasons, I'm asking that the board and Governor Stitt spare my life and commute my sentence to time served.
I feel horrible for Mr. Howell and his family. I should have never helped Liddell move the Suburban, and I would not have done so if I knew what truly had happened. I wish I had talked to the police. I've been haunted by those terrible decisions every day for the past 20 years. I know Liddell and Chris framed me to save themselves, but I absolutely did not commit this crime, and I was wrongfully convicted.
I am innocent. I did not commit the crime that I was convicted of. At the time Mr. Howell was shot, I was at my parents' house with my family, miles away. I did not commit, did not witness, was not at, and had nothing to do with Mr. Howell's murder. Despite that, my overworked, underpaid, and inexperienced trial lawyers failed to adequately investigate my alibi, failed to present helpful evidence, and didn't call a single member of my family to testify that I was at home with them on the night of the crime. In fact, my lawyers simply rested after the state finished this case without presenting any evidence or a single witness, including me. At the very last minute, they advised me not to testify. Until that time, I had every intention of testifying and understood the importance of my testimony to my innocence defense.
I'm asking that my life be spared and my sentence be commuted to time served for several reasons. I am innocent.
And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network, at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, and of course on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight is a very special, if you will, roundtable conversation. We're calling it Innocent on Death Row. 2 innocent men in Oklahoma who are fighting for their lives. Of course, we're talking about Julius Jones. That video, a very special video, was, if you will, a dramatic rereading of the letter written to the state of Oklahoma asking essentially for mercy. And we're also going to talk about the case of Richard Glossop, who we haven't spoken about before on the show, but the folks joining us tonight are subject matter experts, if you will, on both. This is a uniquely, well, I'll call it an Oklahoman show. Joining us tonight is someone who's joined the coalition before and is someone who's contributed greatly to our understanding of the Julius Jones case, of course, is Melissa Hurry. Melissa is a member of the coalition Justice for Julius, works for the state of Connecticut at the Office of State Ethics. She's also finishing up her master's in criminal justice at Central Connecticut State University, and she has been involved in the field of law for nearly 25 years. Also joining us, someone who is no stranger to those of us watching in Libertarian circles, Natalie Bruno is the Libertarian candidate to be governor of the state of Oklahoma. She considers herself and is a strong advocate for sentencing reform and criminal justice reform. Someone I'm meeting tonight for the very first time is Jimmy Lawson. He is a candidate for mayor of Oklahoma City. He's a Democrat, but clearly a keen connection to the city, to the state of Oklahoma. I'll say this somewhat euphemistically, its unique sense of criminal justice, and in role of an activist is, again, seeking to be mayor of Oklahoma City. Jimmy, first of all, it's great to meet you for the first time. Thank you for joining us. I know you just, we're running a few minutes late. You were at an event tonight at a fundraiser for Mr. Jones. Why don't you just introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and what you were doing tonight?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, Pat Ford, I appreciate you having me. It's an honor and a privilege to be here tonight. So a little bit about myself. I'm Jimmy Lawson, best friend of Julius Jones. We have been best friends for 31 years now. So I've been fighting for him, of course, for these past 22 years. My background is in finance and education. So I work for the state of Oklahoma for an agency as director of finance. And then I'm a college professor at Rose State. I teach finance and accounting courses and economics. So that's kind of my background. I'm a father of 3 girls. My oldest is 21, 16, and 13. Been married for 19 years. And I've done a lot of stuff for Oklahoma City community over the past 2 decades, not just in criminal justice, but in the areas of service and homelessness and other areas. So that's kind of who I am. Julius Jones, I always say, is one of those special individuals. He had such a promising future, right? He was one of the smartest people, I always say, that I've grown up with. He has such an amazing mental capacity. So this particular week, we have what we call Justice for Julius Week. And tonight we put on a event called the Hoop Fest, Justice for Julius Jones Hoop Fest. What I did is I reached out to a lot of our former high school teammates that Julius and I play with, and we played some basketball. We had an amazing turnout tonight, by the way. So we played for about 2.5, 3 hours, and I need some Epsom salt because I'm super duper sore.
You bring up an incredibly important point. We have a saying at the coalition, and as we like to say, in the halls of justice, justice is usually found in the halls. We'll get in depth into the particulars of the case, but if you can just give us a sense, mounting a defense like this has got to be astonishingly expensive. To give someone the defense that they weren't presented with at the initial case level, which of course obviously would have prevented all of this. You're talking a serious financial commitment, aren't you?
Absolutely. It takes a lot of money and time and effort to put on a defense, as you mentioned, at this level, right? At this level where we are in the ball game, which in our opinion, we're at the end of the ball game. So you're absolutely correct. It takes a locking of arms of many different organizations and people and star power. The last defense provided us access to a lot of star power. Kim Kardashian, Blake Griffin, Russell Westbrook, Dak Prescott, the list goes on and on. So, but that's what it takes at this level of the ball game to do what we need to do to bring Julius Jones home.
And from your special perspective, if you will, as someone who's an activist, someone committed to the community at a variety of levels, someone who's a dad, someone who grew up if you will, in the streets of Oklahoma, has the community really come together around Mr. Jones and his case, and has this become a uniting factor?
You know, one of the most unique factors about this particular case is one of the first times in my lifetime that I saw all walks of life come together on one accord. And I figured it out. As I was doing the first rally in 2018, I figured out that there were so many people that also wanted justice, right? They had a family member, cousin, uncle, grandma, friend. So the Julius Jones reminded them of their family member and how important it is to get justice. So it was one of those amazing, unique moments for me when I looked around and was so diverse, young and old, white, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, all walks of life, kids, adults, midlife. So it was everybody standing on one accord, in the pursuit of justice. And to have a case right here in our backyard, that's what made it palpable to me. That's what made it personable. Because wait a minute, we have a guy right here in Oklahoma City, right? So that dynamic, man, provided an amazing opportunity for the community to lock arms and come together.
Natalie Bruno joins us, as I mentioned in the run-up to the show. She is the Libertarian candidate for governor of Oklahoma. Natalie, speak to us a few moments. Give us sort of a brief intro, if you will, into the state of criminal justice in the Sooner State, as we say.
Yeah, absolutely. So quick intro, Natalie Bruno. I am a registered Libertarian and I'm running for governor next year. I have a pretty strong past when it comes to just philanthropy in general. But what kind of led me into criminal justice reform specifically is the fact that I was a CASA volunteer, so a court-appointed special advocate for children for about 6 years in Carter County. And then I'm on the associate board for Oklahoma Lawyers for Children. And so it really gave me a starting in-depth look into the extremely high incarceration rates that we have. And so, of course, I'm a person that loves information. And so I kind of went down a rabbit hole and, realized that we are the #1 state in the nation for incarcerating women. We are #2 for incarcerations overall, and that's per capita. Our sentencing for nonviolent crimes is 78% longer, and it's over 50% longer even for violent crimes. So we have a really serious issue in our state, not only for the fact that we are imprisoning more people, but we're imprisoning them far, far longer than they should be. And it's not because we have more criminals here. We have the same kind of situation, if not less of a situation of crime in our state as other states. We have just had a really bad history of not doing a very good job criminal justice-wise for the people here. And so that is one of the reasons why that is really big on my platform, is because, enough is enough. Jimmy brought up a really great point about how he mentioned at the rally how many people can relate to Julius because they have family members and stuff like that. But a lot of people don't realize, with the huge amount of percentages in our state, you are just, as an individual, just one stroke of bad luck or one, showing up at the wrong place at the wrong time from being in Julius's shoes. It's really unfortunate. So many of us have in our lives made friends with the wrong people, been at the wrong place at the wrong time. And the fact that our state has such a strong history of putting people, innocent people, behind bars for crimes they didn't commit, for, creating evidence that's not there, for, enticing people to make deals. Because, Julius is not the first time this has happened. This has been happening over and over and over and over. And it's really got to stop. And, somebody needs to kind of put their foot down, which is one of the reasons, why I'm running. To kind of hold people accountable for this improper sentencing.
Melissa Hurry, of course, has rejoined the coalition this evening. She is the individual who brought the case to our attention, joined us several months ago. Melissa, if you can give us just a little bit of history of the current status of the case in terms of where his appeal stands. And then we'll open up the conversation to what happened, how did we get here, where do we go from now, and where, we'll pay particular attention to the weaknesses, issues in the public defender's offices, issues in the type of conflicts and the ethical lapses that occurred in the sheriff's and in the prosecutor's section. We're going to go into all of that. But first of all, give us a snapshot of what's happened the last few months and where we stand now.
Well, there's actually been quite a bit of activity just over the past week or so. Julius had a commutation hearing that was scheduled before the Board of Pardon and Parole for September 13th. But what the AG of Oklahoma did was requested that the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals schedule execution dates. This gets a little complicated for 7 inmates on Oklahoma death row, and only 7 because there was action filed regarding Oklahoma's protocol that they use for lethal injection and whether or not that violates the 8th Amendment. When this was filed in the federal district court, they asked the death row inmates what alternate method of execution that they would prefer. And 7 of those inmates chose not to pick an alternative method of how they wanted the state to murder them, basically. And Julius Jones was one of those people. So the district court entered an order that there should be a trial on the issue of whether the protocol is a violation of the 8th Amendment. Now, mind you, this protocol was the cause of botched executions that caused Oklahoma to issue a moratorium in 2015. They're still using the same drug that they were using in that protocol. So here comes the question of whether or not it violates the 8th Amendment. But because there were 7 people who didn't choose an alternative method of execution, again, the Attorney General is seeking the Court of Criminal Appeals to issue execution dates for those inmates. So Julius Jones's commutation hearing that was scheduled for September 13th is now a clemency hearing that's tentatively scheduled for October 5th, but the Court of Criminal Appeals needs to formally issue those execution dates that the AG requested. So I've been monitoring to see if the Court of Criminal Appeals has done that. I didn't see anything today. There were a flurry of objections filed from Julius's legal team and from the Oklahoma Federal Public Defender's Office on behalf of the other inmates, at least some of them who weren't included in that stay that was issued in the federal district court. So there are a ton of constitutionality questions that are surrounding this right now. And this has all happened like within the past week and a half. I think August 25th is actually when the AG filed that notice that he was requesting those execution dates.
Wow. So you've got this in a sense, I'll call it proceedings chaos. What you have happening then is, if I understand this correctly, you've got to technically create a sentencing date in order to give someone the opportunity to be absolved from that sentencing date. Am I oversimplifying things, or yikes? How do we make sense of this?
I've been trying. I'm here in Connecticut, so I'm trying to make sense of what's going on there. But that is what I understand, that until the Court of Criminal Appeals actually issues that execution date that the AG requested, then that's when the clemency date is actually technically scheduled. But the Board of Pardon and Parole met on Tuesday, and so they came up with clemency hearing dates for these individuals that are on the list of execution dates requested by the AG. So they have set forth dates where they will have clemency hearings, but I still believe that the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals would need to set those execution dates through there before they're actually considered scheduled, from what I understand.
So how far in advance do they schedule these? I mean, are we talking about an execution date that's a year from now, or are we going to enter some sort of rush?
They requested an
to beat the clock.
Execution date for Julius of October 28th, and then there's a 21-day period the clemency hearing has to occur within before that execution date.
So,
Yeah. all of the execution dates were lined up between October 5th and January 15th, I believe, for all of the individuals.
Yeah, they go for October 7th was John Grant as a death row inmate, who was the first one scheduled for October 7th, and I believe the last one is in February of 2022.
So
which, mind you, the Eighth Amendment trial is supposed to be in February of 2022 as well.
So despite the fact that there's ongoing litigation, despite the fact that there are ongoing appeals and issues surrounding the nature of the potential execution itself, we've got the specter, and I'll draw a similarity with the federal government. In the waning days of the prior administration, the federal Justice Department seemed like they were hell-bent, and forgive me for saying this, I don't know of a nicer way or a less blunt way of saying this. It seemed like they were in a rush to kill people before anyone had a chance to stop them. Is that too brutal? Or is that the sense that you get?
That's exactly.
We also have a brand new attorney general as well.
I'm sorry, what was that, Natalie?
I said we also have a brand new attorney general as well that was just appointed in June. So I think that part of it has to do with that as well. People like to take new positions and puff out their chest, and there definitely, I feel like, was a jumping of the gun to just come in and just months later decide to start back up executions.
So in a very real sense, and I want to get into this, the real specifics of the case, but in a very real sense, you've got the wheels of justice that turn ever so slowly. And, I was about to remark before you mentioned the imminent execution date that it seems like, in our world, if something gets canceled or postponed, 3 or 4 days later we pick it up, but only in the justice system is something canceled or postponed. And, we'll catch you in 3 or 4 months because, as is so often the case, and I know I'll get a knowing glance from Natalie, the federal government is so incapable of, if you will, maintaining the efficacy and efficiency of a system that they impose on other people. In other words, we couldn't possibly behave in the haphazard, ham-handed, heavily fisted way the government does because we get fined to death or something. So how, you've got a pending case on the actual method of execution. My understanding is, and this is that the drug manufacturer of the alleged approved method of education no longer wishes to sell these drugs to governments. Is that correct?
It's from what I understand, and I picked this up in that class I had mentioned that I took just on the death penalty. A lot of the drugs that are used in many of these states' protocols were manufactured in Europe. I'm not saying that all of them were, but I'm saying that a good majority of them. And Europe is very against the death penalty for the most part, and they don't want to supply those drugs to use them to execute people. So I think that was the start of the drugs being difficult to obtain.
Jimmy, talk to us, if you will, like I said, before we get into the real specifics of the case. What is Julius's mindset right now? What optimistic, spiritual? This has got to be. Well, first of all, I just can't even imagine the pressure right now, the rage of feelings between, impotence in dealing with an out of control criminal justice system mixed in with the fear associated with these imminent dates at this point, and apparently the rush to get things done. Mixed in with just a frustration of being innocent. Where is he at right now?
Yeah, as you say, it's been a real roller coaster ride over the past 4 or 5 years. I like to go back to around 2015 when they were executing a couple of gentlemen, Charles Warner being one of them, and they had a botched execution. That was important because it provided an opportunity for the state of Oklahoma to put a moratorium and put a freeze on any future executions, because Richard Glossop and Julius Jones were kind of climbing that ladder at that time of having the possibility, right, that may be the next in line. So that was emotional. So we get past that, and then voila, we have the denial of our last Oklahoma appeal. that was emotional, right? So we're trying to figure out how can we get a new trial if the protocols won't allow us to put new evidence in to get a new trial? Like, duh, right? That's the point of an appeal, to have an opportunity to try to introduce new evidence so you may have an opportunity at a new trial. So that was a roller coaster ride. And then after the last defense airs, we have this amazing support and push. And then last week, boom, here it is again, right? The AG throws a curveball. I want to set execution dates. So, Julius has been going up and down quite a bit the past couple of years. And last week was really challenging mentally for him. We spent some good time talking and strategizing about, being locked into where he wants to be, which is when he's walking out as a free man. I try my best to continue to build that picture for him, because that's important. If you pay attention to the small details, that'll get you off track, right? So my job is to keep him focused, right, on the promise that he is going to get out. So we're standing on that promise. And as you said, Pat, it's a mental battle. It's been such a mental battle these past 22 years, and specifically the last 3. But we're still chucking. We're not going anywhere. Me and Julius like to use the word pit bull mentality. We're locked in and we're not going to let go.
Let's start, if you will, from the beginning. You know him personally. You're a pal, a friend, a very close confidant. What happened? How did this all start? And then I'll ask Melissa to kind of fill in from the legal perspective where the system just started to break down. But give us, if you will, the sense of the events themselves.
Yeah, sure. So I want to start off first and talk a little bit about what the Oklahoma County culture looked like back in the 90s, okay. Particularly in the city of Hammond. Looked much different than it does now. It's more diverse now, but back then it was more predominantly white. And the notion is that crimes like murders and things of that nature just didn't take place in Edmond. That was kind of the culture. So for Julius, he had an amazing background, both parents, super smart, Christian background. He did all the right things. Then when we graduated, there was a gentleman that we played high school ball with by the name of Christopher Jordan that he began to hang around a little bit, and which was, I didn't really draw any red flags about it because we all were basketball players. And every time I would see them is when we're going to the gym to play ball. So I didn't really have any internal negative thoughts about, okay, Westside may be doing something towards Julius. So I kind of blew it off. They got a little bit more consistent in the summer of 1999. And around maybe June or so, I approached Julius. His parents stayed 5 houses down from my parents. And I was like, listen, you know the deal with Westside. He doesn't do the things that we do, right? He's not on our side of the fence, which he has never been. So at that point, I thought, okay, so you need to make a separation, Jay. We're hanging with this guy because we know the system is all about associations, right? That's how they operate. Right. Absolutely. And so about a month goes by, and voila, all this takes place. The media was painting a certain picture about this is the type of suspect that we're looking for, a gangbanger, right? Particularly a blood. So I'm thinking, wow, they don't even have any real evidence, but the media and Bob Macy was already planting that seed, right, in the community of this is the type of person that we're looking for. Right. So the twist and turn that happened was word gets out that Westside has a connection with this particular crime, and they get to him first. And this is how Julius got swept into this spider web, as I call. So they get to Westside first, and he just says, I didn't do it. I was driving. Julius shot him. So the law enforcement is kind of like, who's Julius Jones? Right? So that was a shocker because, again, during the trial, there wasn't any evidence that really perpetuated towards Julius. So it was a mystery from the get-go, right, of how Julius Jones' name got swept into this web. But it was really on the base of Westside swooping him in, because Bob Mason made it very clear that whoever this individual was, we're going to get the death penalty. So I think they scared the EBGBs out of Westside. And that's how he pulled in Julius Jones.
So often, and Melissa, I'm going to jump to you for a second. Law enforcement uses these gang databases around the country to create an artificial connection to people based simply on personal knowledge of each other or a similar shared activity, a neighborhood connection. How often have you seen in your research, and everybody feel free to jump on this, where guilt by association is taken to an entirely new level? And I'll just point out, in Rhode Island, we had something called the Jump Out Boys, which was a not-so way of talking about the gang unit at the Providence Police Department, called the Jump Out Boys, because they would drive up onto the curb, jump out of their cars, and begin to, as they say, verbally accost, assail young people based on perceived gangland colors, or they'd seen somebody talking to somebody. By the way, completely ignorant of the fact that when you live in a neighborhood, particularly if it is a tougher neighborhood, you have to coexist. How often is this an issue from all your perspectives?
You know, I was just talking to somebody about this today. There's a case out of Los Angeles that I'm trying to help out in, and they're trying to make that connection there. And what they did in that case, and it's not out of the ordinary, is they'll do like a 6-pack lineup, and they'll put like 6 people in that lineup that, you know, they think could have like the visibility to be gang members. And it's almost of the mind frame that, okay, we got these 6 guys here, you just pick out one of them, because if you pick out one of them, they're gang members, and we're going to get one of them off the street anyway. I mean, the attitudes that people are wrongfully convicted in the ways that they're wrongfully convicted, you wouldn't believe it. People don't believe it until they actually look and see. And that's one of the things. I mean, just like even like informant testimony, giving people deals to testify against other people, that is a top component right now of wrongful convictions. That is the number one component of how wrongful convictions happen. In faulty eyewitness testimony, there's a huge racial disparity in those statistics. I think out of since 1989, there was 700 and something faulty eyewitness instances of faulty eyewitness testimony, and almost 500 of them were African American men. I did my own analysis on that for a project, actually.
And Natalie, from your perspective as someone who's a native Oklahoman who's surrounded by, if you will, the criminal justice system in your political interactions, particularly at that period of time, and I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm very glad you pointed that out, Jimmy, because we do have to look at this case because it's spanned generations now, and you think about wasted lives because of this madness. It was a very different world. But what's your perspective on the criminal justice system and how it attempts to bring people together under this notion of shared criminality?
Yeah, so, one thing to bring up too, I live in Edmond right now, which is the town that the murder took place. And even though that was, back in 99 when that happened, it's still a very more uppity, I guess I would say, kind of area to where they still kind of will pigeonhole people into being guilty based off of purely who they've been around before they've even had anything go to trial. And I know that is the same case in other states as well, as was mentioned. But especially here, it's kind of like a very small town mentality, even in Oklahoma City, even in Edmond. I think it's just because of the fact that even though, it is the city, it's still population-wise, not nearly as big as some other large cities. And so everybody kind of knows everybody runs in the same circles. And the police here are especially still to this day in 2021, very, very bad with, if they already know who you are because of the people that you associate with or for things that you've done in the past, then you might as well consider yourself pretty much a prime subject. And we've seen that repetitively over and over again. But even in cases back during that time period, there were even some where even if they didn't have a history, if they just felt like they were going to put it on you, that was just the way it was, just like in the Richard Glossop case. He had no history at all. And because they decided that he was going to be guilty and he was going to, be the one to kind of, take the fall for the case, he was the one that took it. And the other person, Justin Sneed at the time, he admitted to doing it. And then they coerced him into saying that Richard was the one that did it. And that's something that when it comes to asking other people or giving deals on sentencing for flipping on other people shouldn't even be allowed anymore, because either I could never see how that can benefit anybody or you can get truth out of that. Obviously, any individual, if they think they're going to get a deal, they're going to say whatever they feel like they need to say to save their own lives.
And now, excuse me, and now, of course, we move into possibly the most critical period of all, and that is the combination of the initial prosecution as well as a public defense. So, Melissa, I know we're relying on you because you've done so much research into the criminal process, if you will. How badly flawed were these processes, and what type of defense was he afforded?
There was no defense. There wasn't a witness called on Julius's behalf, and the public defender that was appointed was very inexperienced in capital cases. As a matter of fact, he even signed an affidavit, saying that the representation wasn't what it should have been. But the thing is, the court doesn't like to call that ineffective counsel. They like to call it trial strategy. And I don't understand how you not calling a witness on your client's behalf is any type of strategy. To me, that's just ineffective counsel. But so
you've seen around the nation a pretty wide, both in your research and your immediate experience in Connecticut, a pretty wide range of displays of public competence of public defense. Where would you put Oklahoma? And I know we're painting with a broad brush here, and I'm sure there's some fine people working in the Oklahoma system, but overall, does the state aggressively work to provide folks like Julius Jones the necessary tools to mount at least a credible or professional criminal defense?
No. I think that a state that, especially that practices the death penalty, has an obligation to at least provide defense that is skilled in that area. And I don't feel like, and certainly in Julius's case, they did not provide that at the initial trial. And we know that everything is so crucial at that trial, because if things are not presented at that trial, if evidence is not presented at that trial that they say is available at the time of trial, even if it was from ineffective counsel, you're barred from presenting that in the future. So you can say, okay, well, it wasn't ineffective counsel, it was trial strategy, and that evidence was available, even though he didn't submit it or touch upon it or even call a witness at the state trial. But now you're barred from bringing that evidence because it's a procedural bar.
If you could explain that in a little more detail, because let's focus on that a moment. We're all used to what I call, in these day and age, we're all experts, right? There's the Facebook School of Epidemiology. There is, of course, this week an intensive program going on social media everywhere to understand climate patterns and the weather. And then, of course, there's the Law and Order School of I saw it on TV. They found the evidence at the last minute. So cue the happy ending. That's not quite how it works, is it?
No, that's not quite how it works at all. That's why I don't watch Law and Order, because it's not how it works at all. But if there is, quite simply, if there is evidence that was available at the time of the initial trial in the state court, and that evidence is not presented, you are barred from bringing that evidence, and that's a condition of the AEDPA. So this is where a lot of it's so difficult to prove your innocence. Once you're convicted, it is extremely difficult. And when we look at wrongful convictions, we can measure those by exonerations. So exoneration is when somebody who is wrongfully convicted is found actually innocent. But there's so many cases that we have to wonder, knowing how hard it is to prove to be exonerated, how many people who have been wrongfully convicted are still in prison that have not been able to prove their innocence, and it is extremely concerning, for a lack of a better word, when they're death penalty cases. So,
Right.
I mean,
and in this case, you've got, I'm just postulating here, but you've got multiple issues. You've got the availability of resources to mount a public defense, the fact that there isn't a series of investigators working for that public defense firm who are ready to literally do night-long stakeouts. Again, let's mention DNA. Let's mention, of course, the element of the police department and their treatment of evidence. And that's a critical point in this, isn't it? I mean, we've got a criminal prosecutor who later faced issues. I'm being polite here. And we've got a police department. You've got the chain of evidence and the evidence presented in this case. Maybe you could comment on that as well.
Well, first of all, at the time, the DA's office in Oklahoma was run by Bob Macy. And for anybody who doesn't know who Bob Macy is, he made the notorious list of one of the 5 most deadliest prosecutors. There was a Harvard study that actually determined that. And he was responsible for sending 54 people to death row. And almost half of those cases were overturned. And I believe it was 17 or 18 of them where there was actually misconduct that was found in those cases. And he was notorious. And I mean, I'm from Connecticut and I know all about Bob Macy, but because he was notorious as the prosecutor who just sought the death penalty, the Cowboy Bob Macy, they called him. So it's concerning because we know that he was involved in a lot of cases of misconduct. And they would like you to think that it stopped there, but it didn't stop there because there's been other DAs in that office who have done the same thing. And it's a pattern. It is a very disturbing pattern. There have been, so the National Registry of Exonerations has recorded every exoneration that has occurred since 1989. So there have been wrongful convictions of death row inmates in Oklahoma. There certainly have. And if you go back even further than that, according to the Death Penalty Information Center, if you go back to the time of Furman versus Georgia, 1973, there have been 10 exonerations of death row inmates from Oklahoma, okay? And out of those 10, 7 of the cases included misconduct. I believe 6 of them included perjured testimony and half of them included both. So wow. That's concerning. And they would like you to believe that it doesn't happen, but it does happen. And some of the cases that it has happened in has happened exactly the same way as what they did to Julius Jones. And those are statistics. That it's not any speculation. That's not opinion. Those are facts.
Right. And Jimmy, if you could jump in, if you will, and comment on the cultural aspect and the reaction of the community to law enforcement and to this cowboy, as it were, at that time. Was it well known that you had an out of control law enforcement community that was, doing whatever they had to do to provide statistics? Was the community aware of that?
And that's a great question, because the culture back then was, hey, we elected this DA, so we trust this DA that he's doing the integral thing and acting with accountability. But what was going behind the scenes is that a lot of people weren't really paying attention here locally about what the DA was really doing until after the fact. So when I was watching this live in the courtroom, I could tell, the first 2 days, maybe 3 days of trial that there was a system already in place that took the African-American male and treated them differently than our counterparts.
Right.
And then 2, what was being process from a DA standpoint was acceptable, right? So when it came to our time to provide our defense, and our public defender gets up, I knew we were in trouble. I mean, I knew we were in trouble. He was highly unprepared, and his whole methodology was very strange to me going into the trial. So that was a problem. And then I started watching as we're going through trial, because they have other courtrooms, of course, right? Mm-hmm. So we would take a break and I would jump into another courtroom and just watch. And the same type of dynamic when it comes to the racial dynamic in Oklahoma County was happening in each courtroom. So I was watching how this system was being unequitable, and it looked like it was being okayed by everybody. So that was very strange to me, right? From a cultural standpoint, like, isn't the law supposed to protect and serve all walks of life? Right? So I'm watching this system live and direct, that not being the case.
What impact, Jimmy, has this had on the greater Oklahoma City community, particularly with regard to marginalized people, or as we now say 20 plus years later, we call it the BIPOC community? What kind of impact are we talking?
I think it's had a definite ripple effect. I think those who are of minority descent absolutely has a different relationship with law enforcement than our white counterparts. That's a fact. That is a 100% fact. And OKCPD also has that mantra. I mean, it is what it is. I don't shy away. I'm very transparent about where we are in time with law enforcement. There's a lot of changes that needs to be made, and they treat different communities differently. Again, we always go back to, aren't we one body under one law, right? But you know, Pat, that's not the way it happens in reality.
Right. So when you see it, let's just for a moment extrapolate this to sort of a national level. When you see communities across the country, doesn't matter whether it's in Ferguson or Staten Island or Brooklyn or Miami, fill in the blanks. When you see entire communities, and I'm talking about very often multiple generations, multiple backgrounds, but ultimately from one community, and you see them rise up in this fury, are you surprised?
I am not. You know, it's all about accountability. Most of the minority communities have been dealing with adverse relationships with law enforcement for a long time. And it's by the beauty of social media and cameras over the past, 10 years that has really extrapolated this microcosm that's been going on in all these separate communities. Now everybody can watch and see for themselves. So I think, the minority communities they're tired, they're exhausted because there's no accountability on the law enforcement side. And then B, there's a lack of representation when it comes to the decision-making process on the law enforcement side. So we don't see here in Oklahoma City, we don't have a very large population of minority police officers. That's a fact. And I think, in my opinion, how do we change that paradigm, maybe at the city level, is talking about how we can change that process of representation from a law enforcement standpoint. Because there is a difference when you have someone that looks like you at a position of leadership or power that may have the potential to change your mind about that position. For example, we've had some police officers at our high school games when me and Julius was playing that were African-American and Latino. And we saw the difference, of accountability because they know your name, they got a relationship with you. So you feel a little bit more empowered to make the right decisions because you have somebody you have this amazing connection with.
Now, Natalie, talk to, if you will, the political ramifications of this. Natalie, you're a libertarian. Full disclosure, I'm a libertarian. That's how we met, and we share some pretty pronounced views on the criminal justice system. But how has the political community of, I'll call it, the greater Oklahoma City area, its suburbs, responded to what has become apparent to anyone with a sense of introspection and anyone with a sense of intellectual honesty, a thoroughly corrupted criminal justice system, how many of these judges, prosecutors, whatever, are elected versus appointed? And has there been any recognition of how, and I'm going to be polite here, flawed they are? And have there been any political ramifications?
Not nearly enough. I would say that there's still probably a huge portion of denial. And the other thing that I've ran into, even just within the last few months, as I have been working alongside a lot of nonprofit groups, even with the conditions of our jails. Unfortunately, with it being such a red state, there is so much pushback from the community that is, oh, well, that's what you get for hanging out with the wrong crowds. That's what you get for, breaking the law. There's a large struggle within our state to have people humanize criminals in general. So obviously, let's put to the side the fact that, Julius is an innocent man and was wrongfully accused. If we just look at criminals in general, there's a real lack of understanding of the fact that a lot of these people are being sentenced way longer, are being not given fair trials, are having all these things kind of put up against them. I mean, we have people that literally have drug charges that are spending 10 to 20 years in jail, while we have people who've been charged with assault and battery that are getting out after not even 2 years. Right. So it's really, really, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And there is a lot of people that understand and acknowledge the fact that we have a serious legal problem here. Even the incumbent Stitt, he even, whenever he was running for election, had made multiple comments about the mis-sentencing and over-sentencing and the criminal justice reform that needs to be done. But yet, just like with any other politician in the past, nothing's been done yet. It's still continuing its same thing. The only positive I could say is that if you look at death penalty sentencing during 1980 to about 2001, which was when Macy kind of was in charge, it was about 5 times the amount of death penalty sentencing that there is now. From about 2002 on, it has been quite a bit lower. But the over-sentencing in general is still rampant. The people who are getting convicted that we are finding out later were innocent or had, wrong. I'm sorry, guys, I'm having a complete brain fart here. Witnesses, sorry. Witnesses that were incorrect on acknowledging somebody that was there, and then they had stone-cold, alibis that just proved that they weren't there. I mean, it's just sad that even though there's acknowledgement there, that there still is a lot of the community that really doesn't feel as bad for the people as they really should. And I wish that we had a little bit more, a little bit less red in our state, because I feel like there would be a lot more pressure put on the police departments and put on the criminal justice system to actually make some measurable changes.
Folks, if you're just joining us, this is the Coalition, coalitionradionetwork.com. You're watching a special presentation we're calling Innocent on Death Row. Julius Jones and Richard Glossop. We're going to talk about Mr. Glossop's case in just a little bit. Joining us, I am your host, Pat Ford. Jimmy Lawson is a candidate to be mayor of Oklahoma City. He is a personal friend of Mr. Jones, community activist, a father, a business person, a teacher, really representing a cross-section of experiences growing up as a member of the minority community in the greater metropolitan Oklahoma City area. Melissa Harry is now a repeat offender, if you will, on the Coalition, having joined us in the past to discuss Mr. Jones's case and also to give us a really valuable insight from a professional perspective on criminal justice reform and its need. And of course, Natalie Bruno is the Libertarian candidate to be governor of the great state of Oklahoma. I'm saying that with a smile tonight through kind of gritted teeth, but it's a wonderful state with wonderful people that just from its perspective, its leadership needs a significant adjustment. Her experience as a community leader has been heavily involved in issues surrounding criminal justice reform. And so what we've got here is three individuals with on a highly personal level, acquainted with Mr. Jones's case, and also with and I use the coalition air quotes here, folks, so forgive me, the criminal justice system in the state of Oklahoma. Let's, if we can, digress just for a moment, because of the international nature, if you will, of the Jones case. Mr. Glossop is not as famous, but can you give us, Melissa, maybe a little bit of background, or Jimmy, a little bit of background on Mr. Glossop's case?
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Well,
You
I'm not.
definitely know more than me.
I'm not as familiar with Richard Glossop's case, but I am somewhat familiar with it. I mean, you have Mr. Glossop, who was accused of setting up this murder for hire plot, in which Justin Sneed was involved, and we have a lot of the same similarities because in Richard Glossop's case, as well as in Julius's case, the files have never been turned over, not in their entirety from the DA. Mr. Sneed was the one who actually murdered the person. So he got I believe a life sentence and Mr. Glossop was sentenced to death. And there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of the same, the deals and the misconduct and the same components that were used to convict Julius, even though it's a bit of a different case. Those same components are still present in Richard Glossop's case. And Richard Glossop came within minutes of being executed.
Wow. By the way, if we could just take a second, I'm guessing that all four of us, and let's go around the room quickly, all four of us are thoroughly, at our most fundamental level, opposed to capital punishment. How much impact did these cases have on that? And I guess, in a quick answer, if it's possible, just why you're opposed to capital punishment. Melissa, why don't you go first?
I am very opposed to capital punishment. I don't think it serves any purpose. It is not a deterrent. There's been over 1,500 executions in the modern death penalty era, they call it, since 1976, since Gregg versus Georgia reinstated the death penalty. And out of those over 1,500 executions, over 1,200 of them have occurred in the southern region of the country, where the homicide rates are the highest. So your argument for a deterrent is kind of blown out of the water with those statistics.
Right.
It's fiscally irresponsible. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars. It doesn't provide any finality to victims or their families because people sit on death row for decades. And a lot of times they never they're never executed. The cost of the appeals and the layers of habeas actions and all the litigation is astronomical. People think that it costs more to keep someone in prison for life, but it doesn't. It costs more to keep somebody on death row. The death penalty is, in my opinion, serves nothing but vengeance. And I think the only argument that you should need to abolish it is the amount of innocent people who have been exonerated. And I don't even want to think about the amount that never were able to prove that. How many innocent people have we executed? That's what I would love to know.
Jimmy, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% against the death penalty. And it's real simple for me. If we have executed one wrongfully convicted individual, that's too many, right? Because death is irreversible. And because of that notion, we just can't put people's lives in the position or in the balance, as we say. And as Melissa kind of pointed to, this system, with 100% fact, is a humanly ran, flawed system. And because it is that manner, we just can't take the chance, at that level to try to play or act like we're God to take someone's life.
Natalie, what say you?
For myself, it's actually very similar to both of them. I used to be pro capital punishment when I was younger. I was one of those people that basically believed, hey, there are certain people that absolutely deserve to die. They do not, deserve to live on this earth. But as they stated, the more and more I became more familiar with different cases, I realized the amount of flaws, the amount of people who were being wrongfully executed. And that completely negates the whole thing. If we, as Jimmy mentioned, if we even kill one person that was innocent, it's just not worth it. And, we have current people on our death row right now that have been on death row for 36 years. They might as well not even be executed at this point, and it's just the nowadays in modern, modern America, there's just really no place for capital punishment, because the very few amount of people that you would say have heinous enough crimes that might even possibly, be worth it, there are, 90 times more that don't.
Is at any point in time, should the state, and I'm using it in the capital S, the state, have the control and the power over life and death? I'll throw that to all of you.
That's an easy answer for me. That's an absolute no.
And Jimmy, I'll throw this as a follow-up out to you. If in fact we are flawed, whether you're a religious person or not, and you believe it as we do who are religious, you are flawed in the eyes of God. And if you are not religious, and you simply look at man in the sense of man and woman, but man as by definition of creation of nature and by definition highly flawed, under what steady state do you see folks assuming then that they have that power? I've always been curious of that. I just, and as just as an aside, I'll throw this out to you, Melissa and Natalie. Does being against the death penalty necessarily make you, air quotes, weak against violent crime?
Absolutely not. As Melissa had already stated, it's, having the death penalty does not deter crime. Longer sentencing does not deter crime. It's the, communities and the village and stuff that we have people in that have more of an impact on whether or not there's going to be crime than the punishments people receive.
Melissa, what's your thoughts?
No, I don't see any place for the death penalty. I don't see any place for the death penalty in our criminal justice system at all. Mm-hmm. Again, there's just no purpose that it serves that is a valid argument. Any argument that somebody could possibly have to support the death penalty, I don't think it makes you weak to recognize that this is not a valid option anymore. It's not working. And I feel I don't even like to have to make other arguments besides the innocent argument, because that for me is it. Like, you cannot execute innocent people. I don't feel like we should be executing anybody at all. But when there is and we know that there have been innocent people convicted to death, we know this. So how can we continue with this practice? And we can't trust the system to fix it, because they haven't fixed it. We're still following these same patterns. And there's these people, like Natalie said, who've been sitting on death row for decades. And I know there's more innocent people on death row, because I know Julius is sitting on death row innocent. And so I know there's other people. And just the thought of that, I can't even imagine what goes through their minds, that they're sitting there innocent and wondering, are they going to execute? Are they going to kill me? Like, I didn't do anything. And I can't even imagine what goes through somebody's mind. And I know I touched on it before, but for Julius to be the intelligent, intellectual, compassionate, extraordinary person that he is just beyond anything that I can comprehend. And he's been sitting there for 22 years. And I want people to understand, like, there's a lot of people who are just of the opinion, like Natalie had mentioned before, well, there's some people that are not fit to be in society, and that's why, we should have the death penalty, because those people should pay for what they did. People have to see the other side of this. And that's any chance that I get that I can speak about these statistics and, what the system really does. I do it and hope that if I reach one or two people, then it's successful.
And if you could all just, if you can carry on with this thought because of your in-depth sort of day-to-day interaction with both government and the criminal justice system, talk about the totality, if you will. If we are flawed individuals, and then ironically we find ourselves in a position where we can pass judgment on other flawed individuals, but talk about the totality of the flaws in both plea bargaining, the flaws, and with a broad stroke, if you will, the flaws in the chain of evidence, the flaws, if you will, in the very process on how we either elect or appoint individuals who are given this enormous amount of power.
Yeah, I will start off first. I think you brought up an amazing point that, in my opinion, as I learned over these past 22 years, one of the cancers in the system is, you hit it on the head. Attorney generals, district attorneys have this unbelievable amount of power that is very rarely challenged. Mm-hmm. So there's not really any oversight or what we call checks and balances on these particular positions. And it's always amazed me that the community continues to vote these people in, right? So it's like, we've got this problem. Now everybody's aware of this problem, but we as voters have the power to change this problem and put maybe someone else in, but they continue to drive that same old car, right? That same train, as Natalie touched on, that we come from this super red state. And I think they're just so comfortable with the status quo that they don't really want to rock the boat. But at some point in time, Pat, as you say, as humans, as a flawed system, something eventually has to be done.
Natalie, I think you'd like to have a say in that in terms of changing, if you will, the who holds the reins of power.
You broke up just a little bit on me. I'm sorry, guys. I think my Wi-Fi is starting to act a little wonky. Repeat that one more time.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, Natalie, I think you'd like to have a say in changing, if you will, who holds the reins of power.
Oh, absolutely. Which one of the reasons why I'm running for governor, right? It is kind of, going off of what Jimmy was saying, the fact that we're just so used to the status quo and the culture that we have kind of provided for our criminal justice system and the police, and that it just allows for all of these accidents and stuff to happen. You had kind of mentioned about the chain of evidence and different things like that, every single step along the way allows for accidents to happen. Science is an amazing thing that has helped so many people who were initially wrongfully convicted become innocent. But it has its own flaws too, right? If we don't store things a certain way, or if the wrong people touch certain things, or different stuff happens, the very same science that we use to exonerate people could wrongfully incriminate people. It's why we have false positives and, false negatives and different testing and stuff like that. So I think that we need to really dive into, instead of worrying about, policing for profit, and instead, policing for peacekeeping, having that extra manpower to be able to better trade on collection of evidence, and paying more attention to making sure that, only the correct evidence is collected and stored appropriately and managed appropriately. If we laid more eyes and stuff and made sure to be more careful with, our criminal justice system and how we even, take those kinds of things in as much as we look at, how we handle money and banking and financing, I think that there would be a lot less room for error and we'd have a lot less wrongful convictions. So I'm hoping that with whether it's myself or anybody else that gets elected next year, that they definitely start holding, these, attorney generals and, DAs and everything more accountable, the police, to make sure that they are more correctly doing things, and that we are trying to actually get, correct sentencing and sentencing reform and positive things done, so we can get out of this kind of system that we've put ourselves in, because we want to be number one at a lot of things, but we don't want to continue to be number one in incarcerating people. I mean, we need to be past that.
I just throw out as an aside, Natalie, isn't it astonishing that the government can manage to pin down a $22 1099 form if you've missed it on your taxes, yet somehow can't. It really is amazing. Yet can't find a way to, on an orderly process, discuss the future of a man's life, as we're talking about tonight. Melissa, I'll kind of bring it to you to begin to close it out. Have we missed anything that you wanted to talk about? And if not, give us sort of your reflections on all of this.
Well, Natalie's talking about accountability. So we definitely, I feel like the DAs and the prosecutors hold so much power, and there is nothing to hold them accountable when they abuse that power. And I think that conviction integrity units, I think, are necessary. Okay. And I know that there are a lot of states that have them. Oklahoma does not. As a matter of fact, last legislative session, Representative Kevin McDougal had proposed a bill that would implement conviction review units to review all death penalty cases. And if you have a state that practices the death penalty, I think that should be a requirement. I think it is essential that you have a unit such as that reviews every case. Everybody who is sentenced to death, short of abolishing the death penalty, which I hope to see someday, but if you are still going to practice it, that should be a requirement to have a conviction review unit. But conviction review units are also essential in finding wrongful convictions. Now, if they operate with a successful type of model, that is.
Right. Well, folks, I thank you so much for coming together. I want to give everybody an opportunity to, on Coalition shows, we have a section called, at the end of every show, called, and by the way, with tongue planted firmly in cheek, we call it shameless self-promotion. And we want to give everybody the opportunity to, if you will, memorialize as part of the show how folks can reach out to you. From your own reflections, each one of you is involved with Mr. Jones in particular on a personal level, how folks can, in your mind, support the ongoing efforts to free Julius Jones. Jimmy, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So I would love each one of y'all's support. You can go to www.lawsonforokc.com to support my Oklahoma City mayor campaign. Would love all the support. If you'd love to make a donation, I appreciate it as well. If you want to stay in contact with what's going on with Mr. Jones, we have a few places that we have going on. Justice for Julius on Facebook, Justice for Julius on Instagram as well. We normally do updates on both of those platforms to keep you plugged in. We also have the website, which is www.justiceforjulius.com, where you can keep up with proceedings, and you can also file some paperwork, some AKA petitions to the Pardon and Parole Board in Governor Stitt's office. Let's see what else. I've got a personal page on Facebook for my mayors, Jimmy Lawson for OKC Mayor. Mm-hmm. And I'll continue to spread the word and allow everybody to dive in where you need to. Julius Jones is not the only one. So I highly would encourage you that if you have the ability and access to use your voice, please do.
Thank you so much. Natalie, why don't you give a sense of where folks can find out about you and your ideas on continuing to support the efforts to free Julius Jones?
Yes, absolutely. So electnataliebruno.com is the best way to get all of the information about me. I have all of my social media handles on there, easy links to be able to click through and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse as well. I also have a very, very active Facebook. The Facebook is probably most active, but I have all of my events and everything, and donation link on my website at electnataliebruno.com. As Jimmy had already mentioned, Justice for Julius on Facebook, they are very, very active. There's a website as well. Same thing for Richard Glossop as well. One thing that I wanted to bring up really quick is, as we mentioned already, Jimmy is a Democrat. Myself, I'm a Libertarian. This is not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue or a Libertarian issue. This is a human rights issue. So bipartisanly, no matter what political party you are affiliated with, our criminal justice system in our state affects every single one of us. So, the amount of people that have reached out to me within our state, just within the last couple weeks, that currently have a brother or a son or a loved one that is currently wrongfully accused or overly sentenced, it would really blow your guys' mind. So definitely, follow and stay up to date on Julius's case. Support him. Write letters to the Pardon and Parole Board. On the Facebook page as well, they are fantastic about letting you know what you can do as a next step to help in that moment. So definitely follow it. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully Julius being able to walk out in November.
Excellent. And Melissa, your thoughts?
Jimmy covered, what you can do to help Julius, and on that website, www.justiceforjulius.com, they make it really easy to be able to contact the Pardon and Parole Board and Governor Stitt by both telephone and email to let them know that, hey, Julius is an innocent man, you need to do the right thing. If people are interested in looking more into wrongful convictions and death penalty cases, there's some really valuable information out there. And the National Registry of Exonerations records so much information about wrongful convictions. Right. And the Death Penalty Information Center has a ton of data and just a whole bunch of information. And they do it on a state-by-state basis about the death penalty as well. And if you'd like to find me, you can find me on social media. I'm very active on Facebook, and it's under my name just as it's spelled.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you all for spending the evening with us. It was all of you brought together to us a fabulous conversation about a difficult subject, a sobering, somber moment in our criminal justice history. Yet I think we all walk out of here optimistic that that justice will be had. I will always offer to all of you our platform here to educate, to discuss, to challenge, promote any of these issues that you find worthy. You honor us simply by lending us your presence, all of you. And I never had an opportunity to meet Mr. Jones or have a conversation with him. I hope you will give my best wishes to him as well as my prayers throughout this difficult period, with the ups and the downs and all of the things that we've reflected on this evening. And I hope you'll as a favor, you'll do that for me. This video will be available in YouTube. We do a little bit of cosmetic work on the front and end of it. It will be available within a day on YouTube. I'll share this with all of you so that you can promote all of your highly informed perspectives out into the community to, in whatever way possible, add to a growing fire of information, love, thought, perspective, philosophy, all of that. And many hands make light work. So again, thank you for joining us. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, as always, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Well, at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. We just ask for a simple like, follow, or share. That's what makes independent media stronger and what gives us an opportunity to amplify our voice above the white noise that constitutes so much of major media these days. Folks, if you're prayerful, say a prayer. If you're not, then extend your wishes. Most importantly, generate your support, not only for Mr. Jones, Mr. Glossop, but whoever in your community represents this type of fundamental challenge to our criminal justice system. Communities around this country, as well known as Ferguson, Missouri, as well known as Staten Island, as well known as in Virginia. All of those are well known to us, but these same tensions, these same problems exist everywhere. These are more well-known microcosms of an acting, if you will, of symptoms of a larger disease. Change can only occur if individuals who listen to this or individuals who participate in this continue to work to affect change. It will not happen on its own. We know that. We need all of your help. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.